Not only has the pay gap between workers and CEOs skyrocketed in recent years, but American workers are actually in the dark about how badly they're being taken advantage of by their employers. As the pay gap continues to grow, workers in the middle class are feeling the squeeze, and I have Howard Nations with me to explain how the problem has gotten so bad. Howard, Les Leopold, a very good friend of Ring of Fire, had him on plenty of times, a writer for Alternate and Salon. He's one of the best out there when it comes to putting together economic statistics and theories, and he's done it again in this new piece that he has out about the pay gap between the haves and the have-nots. And he takes it a little bit further than just saying, the rich are making this much, the poor are making this much. Tell us about these new numbers and theories that he's got out there now.
This is very interesting. The issue right now is the pay gap between the average American worker and the CEO of that company. And the conclusion is, amazingly, that in the entire world, we have the most unequal pay gap between the average worker, not between the lowest income level. We have the largest gap between the paid worker and the paid CEO in the entire civilized world. And the amazing thing is that this didn't show up at all in the recent election. Inequality was obviously not an issue in the last election because the pro-business Republicans swept back into office. They cater to the super rich. They cater to their Wall Street donors, as do many of the Democrats for that matter. But the message is are the voters okay with this kind of disparity?
Well, you brought up a great point just then, and I want to hit it on a second before we move on, but this income inequality, an issue that affects, the 99%.
Right.
This was not a major campaign issue this year. The Democrats could have easily used this issue, brought it up to the public, a public who really does care about the issue. They may not know how bad it is, but they do care about it. And instead, the Democrats allowed the Republicans to hijack the conversation, make it about Obamacare and how horrible Obamacare is, putting the Democrats on the defense. Now, sorry, that was just an aside, but you mentioned it, and it is so infuriating when we have numbers like this in front of us, available to everyone, and you just see these missed opportunities. But so my apologies for going off on that, but let's take it back to this issue. Do the people fully understand what's happened?
Well, that was his point. It's not that the voters are okay with this kind of disparity. It is that American voters are, as he says, the most clueless in the world. A study was done of 55,187 people in 40 countries, and on the issue of severity of the inequality. And the result he found was that we are the most unequal developed nation in the world, and we don't know it. We have no clue, we in America have no clue as to the nature and extent of inequality in the U.S. You tell the average person on the street that we're the most unequal country in the world in terms of wage disparity, nobody's going to believe it. But it's very true. So it's our lack of knowledge on the issue probably had more to do with the election than anything else.
And, Democrats, I think by a margin about 5-1, and Republicans from a margin of about 12-1. That's what they think the pay gap should be. Democrats say a CEO should make $5 for every $1 that his employee makes. And as you pointed out, it's not the bottom level employees. It's not the janitors or people like that. These are the average employees who are right there in the middle, the heart of the company, making things run. Democrats say 5-1, Republicans say 12-1. Obviously, Republicans a little bit more generous with what they want CEOs to make. But still, either one of those, not bad. Not bad considering the fact that currently it is $354 for every $1 that average Joe employee makes. And that is, that is kind of crazy. There's nothing out there right now. There should not be any CEOs making that kind of difference. I mean, we're not seeing these huge product innovations that we had once seen. Yes, we do have, new fancy cell phones that have better cameras and touch screens and voice commands, but they're not out there really making the advancements that we need. And so I don't see how this is justified. Yes, they employ people, but lots of places employ people. This is creating such an unequal society. And we've had ideas and policies and concepts put in place since the New Deal. Have those made any difference on what's happened with the pay gap here?
Well, it's true that corporations employ people, but corporations also employed people back in 1965 when the ratio was $1 for an employee to $20 for the CEO. By 2012, it had risen up to 354 for every dollar that the employee makes. I understand the current today's figure is that it's now $1 for the employee, $380 for the CEO. Let's look at what that really means. If a worker earns $15 per hour, it means that the CEO is getting $5,700 per hour. A worker who earns $30,000 a year, the CEO is getting $11,400,000 a year. And the Americans in this same survey we were talking about thought the gap was 30 to 1. They thought the fair gap would be 7 to 1, but the actual gap is 54 times what the Americans' concept of fairness is. So it's just another thing was this inequality survey that was done worldwide. The misconception doesn't vary by age, gender, income, political leanings, or education. The extent of misconception regarding the inequality of income, it's pervasive across all demographic lines.
And that is a great point. It's not that people are just misinformed. It's that this is an issue, as we had discussed earlier, this is an issue that is not being brought up. You're not seeing it discussed on any of the cable news outlets, very few independent outlets, alternate obviously with this piece by Les Leopold that we're discussing. They did a good job of that, but these issues and these ideas have to be brought to the public. These writers deserve more attention. Their pieces like this deserve, a place in conversation. I mean, the fact that so many Americans across party lines, across gender lines, across income lines don't know about this is very telling. And I think that's why it's so important that we're here talking about this today. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. And, just moving on a bit, what does this do to our democracy when we end up with a CEO that makes $11 million and an employee that makes $30,000 a year? What happens when we get that?
Well, the harsh fact is the USA is the home of the American dream, obviously. But we are the epitome of democracy. We're perceived as the fairest, the most just, the most upwardly mobile country in the world. Yet, how can you be those things if you are also the most equal, the most unequal in the world in disparity of income? The conclusion of the study is that here's what happens. We tune out the data. We simply do not recognize reality. The reason is because it's counterintuitive to our national identity and to our history. Post World War II, we had the highest standard of living in the world. Our annual wages increased every year. During the Cold War years, we held our jobs out as the exemplar for the world. Income boosted every year. The middle class was the envy of the world, and we wanted it to be that way because we were opposing communism. We had 50 years of prosperity for the average American worker. At the same time, the wealthy were paying tax rates as high as 90%. Their share, they were living very well, but their share of the wealth was declining. But now, since both parties are refusing to address the rising inequality, with meaningful remedies, our democracy as we know it, the American dream as we know it, is in severe jeopardy.
It is. And worker productivity in that 50-year span has increased to its highest levels ever. Worker retention has increased. Workers are putting out more. Wages have been stagnant for almost 12 years now. You know, and I think that's kind of what corporate America's figured out. They said, look, we could just squeeze them. We can squeeze them as much as possible until they almost break. And at that point, that's what we can steal from them when it comes to the pay gap. And Howard, thank you so much for telling us this story today. It's a great one. I know we'll be talking about it again in the future. It's something every American needs to be aware of, and they also need to be talking about this. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Farron.